Jacob was alone, and the night had no end. He had sent away his wives, his children, his servants, and all his possessions. The campfires behind him flickered into silence. Before him, the dark river. Above him, silence. And within him, a storm. He had deceived his brother. He had fled from Laban. He had run his whole life. But now he stood at the edge of the promised land, and the past was coming to meet him. And then, a man appeared. No trumpet, no introduction, just the weight of a presence, just the clash of limbs. They wrestled, not for a minute, not for an hour, but until the sky began to bleed with dawn. Jacob fought, not knowing who he faced, only knowing he would not let go. And then the man said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." But Jacob, trembling, clinging, gasped, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the stranger, who was no mere man, asked him, "What is your name?" And Jacob replied, "Jacob." And the man declared, "No longer shall your name be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." Jacob had heard many voices in his life. The voice of his mother urging deception, the voice of Isaac blind and old, the voice of Esau crying out in wrath. But that night he heard a voice that named him truly. The voice in the dark was the voice from eternity. Years passed. Another voice, another night. But this time it was not a man worn by years. It was a boy, Samuel. He was young, sleeping in the sanctuary near the ark of God. The lamp had not yet gone out. The silence was thick, holy. And into that silence came the call, "Samuel." He awoke, ran to Eli. "Here I am. You called me." But Eli said, "I did not call." "Lie down again." A second time. The same voice, "Samuel." Again the boy ran. Again the old man denied. A third time, "Samuel." And then Eli understood. "If he calls again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" The Lord came and stood there, calling as before, "Samuel, Samuel." He was not in the earthquake. He was not in the fire. He was in the voice that knew the name. There are voices in your mind, urgent voices, frightened voices, condemning voices. But there is also the voice. It does not scream, it calls, it does not demand, it invites. It speaks your name not to control you, but to awaken you. Have you ever wondered whose voice it is that keeps you up at night? What if it is not anxiety? What if it is not fear? What if it is the Lord calling? Softly, He still speaks. He still stands beside sleeping souls. He still waits for the one who dares to say, "Speak, Lord." So tonight, if He whispered your name, would you recognize it? Would you mistake it for your thoughts? Would you run to someone else asking, "Did you call me?" Or would you respond not with fear, but with surrender? He's not trying to impress you with thunder. He's drawing you with grace. Jacob wrestled with what he did not understand. Samuel listened to what he could not see. One was changed in the struggle. One was awakened in stillness. And you, where are you tonight? Are you sleeping through the whisper of God? Or are you ready to rise and answer? Your name is not forgotten. Your story is not ignored. He calls you still. "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." The sea roared before them. Behind them, dust rose as Pharaoh's chariots approached. On either side, panic, cries, children weeping, mothers clutching infants, men shouting, asking Moses what he had done. "Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you brought us here to die?" And Moses stood still, his staff in hand, his heart pounding, his ears filled with chaos. Yet within that storm of fear he waited for the voice. He had heard it before from a bush that burned but did not consume. He had heard it through 10 plagues and midnight cries. He had followed it into the unknown. And now the voice spoke again. "Tell the people to go forward." But how? The sea was in front. Death was behind. Then came the whisper, Lift up your staff." And Moses did, and the waters parted. The people did not know the voice. They knew fear. But Moses knew the difference between panic and calling. Panic pushes, it drives, it screams, it shames. But calling leads. God does not drive like Pharaoh. He does not shout like fear. He speaks with peace, even when the sea hasn't parted yet. Moses said to the people, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." And the Lord did. The winds blew. The walls rose. The path opened. Because Moses waited for the voice and did not follow the noise. So now ask yourself, which voice are you following? The one that drives with guilt, or the one that leads with grace? Panic will make you run anywhere, but the Spirit will make you wait for the waters to part. Which voice is louder in your life right now? The one who knows the way, or the voice that tells you to hurry, to fear, to flee? The Lord is still leading, but He does not push. He calls, He guides. He parts the sea, if you'll only be still. The people shouted, they blamed, their fear became fury. "You've led us to our death," they cried. "We would have been better off serving Pharaoh than dying in this desert." But Moses didn't speak yet. He lifted his eyes not to the waves, not to the army, but to the heavens. He remembered what it meant to listen. He remembered the still, small voice that spoke from the mountain, the instructions whispered in the silence of the tent, the commands that came not with fire, but with clarity. And he waited. What do you do when your mind is flooded with fear, but your heart remembers peace? You pause. You listen for the voice that doesn't push. Panic pushes. It says, "Do something, anything." But peace says, "Wait for me." That day, the people of Israel learned what happens when fear shouts and faith whispers. The waters parted only after obedience. The miracle came after the stillness. And you are standing before a sea of impossibility. Behind you, pressure. Before you, unknown. Will you run, or will you wait? He is still the God who parts seas. But He does not part them with panic. He parts them with purpose, and always with peace. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is not stepping forward, but standing still. To be still is not to be passive. It is to be anchored. It is to say, "I will not move until He speaks." And in that stillness, God moves. Not always with parted waters. Sometimes with a whisper that calms the inner storm before the sea ever shifts. There are moments in life when everything demands action. The world says, "Fix it now, run now, react now." But God says, "Be still. I am the Lord." The same voice that stilled the sea for Moses would later still the storm for the disciples. When waves crashed against their boat, Jesus stood and said, "Peace, be still." The storm listened. Will you? Because sometimes the sea obeys before we do. The miracle was never the parting of water. It was the quiet heart that trusted before it saw. And now you're here. Maybe not before a sea, but before a choice. To trust or to panic. To move in fear or to wait in faith. God leads. He never drives. Fear drives. Shame drives. Ego drives. But God calls. He walks ahead. He invites. Moses lifted his staff, not because he knew the sea would part, but because he trusted the voice. You have a staff too, not of wood, but of trust. Will you lift it? Will you stop running? And will you be still until He speaks? Because the voice that leads is still speaking, and He's calling you forward, but never without peace, never with panic, always with purpose. Balaam was a prophet, not of Israel, not raised among the people of the covenant, but somehow he knew the Lord. Somehow he heard the voice, and kings noticed. Balak, king of Moab, feared the rising power of Israel. He saw their victories and trembled, so he sent messengers to Balaam. "Come," they said, "curse this people for me." And Balaam did what seemed right. He asked God. The answer was clear. Do not go with them. Do not curse them, for they are blessed. So Balaam refused. But Balak was persistent. He sent more messengers with greater honor, more promises, more silver. And again Balaam asked. This time the Lord said, Go with them, but do only what I tell you. It sounds like permission, but it was a test, because God had already spoken. And when God has spoken, you don't need to ask again. Yet Balaam saddled his donkey and went. But something strange happened. God was angry. Why didn't he say Balaam could go? Because the voice of God does not change. And Balaam's ears were no longer tuned to the word, but to the reward. On the road, the angel of the Lord stood in Balaam's path, sword drawn. But Balaam couldn't see him. The donkey did. 3 times the donkey turned aside. 3 times Balaam beat her, until finally the donkey spoke. Why have you struck me? And then Balaam saw the angel. He fell face down. He realized he had been blind. Not just in eyes, but in discernment. He had mistaken greed for guidance. Desire had echoed so loudly it drowned the original word. And God made a donkey speak to show the prophet how deaf he had become. There are voices that tell you what you want to hear. They use scripture. They sound holy. They wear light like a cloak. But they are not the voice. The true voice of God will never contradict his word. It doesn't matter how many confirmations, how many signs, how many dreams. If it goes against the word, it is not him. We live in a world where spiritual confusion is dressed as revelation, where Balaams are many and donkeys are few. So ask yourself, is what you're hearing consistent with what he has already said? Or is it just your longing, disguised in prayer? The enemy is subtle. He quoted scripture to Jesus in the wilderness. He offered kingdoms with verses, but Jesus responded not with new revelation, but with, "It is written." 3 words that silence every false voice. It is written. If Balaam had said those words, he wouldn't have needed a donkey to remind him who he served. So now pause. Ask yourself, is the voice guiding you today grounded in the eternal word? Or is it simply echoing the part of you that still wants control? When you pray, do you seek God's voice or God's permission? There's a difference. And the line between calling and convenience is thinner than we think. Many today are like Balaam. They hear the word, but keep asking until they get the answer they want. They pray not to obey, but to negotiate. They say, I'm waiting on God. But what they mean is, I'm waiting until God says what I like. But God is not a mirror for your desire. He is not an echo of your ambition. He's not impressed by repetition. When he speaks, once it is enough. But Balaam didn't listen. He listened to the second offer. He listened to the promise of wealth. And in doing so, he stopped listening to the truth. The voice of God is not confused, but Balaam was. And so are we when we let our emotions become our guide. You can convince yourself of anything if you pray long enough without surrender. But the voice you hear must match the word you've read, or it is not his. Satan comes as an angel of light, but the light does not mean truth. Only the word reveals the real. So, if you are unsure what you're hearing, ask, is it written? Because God is not double-minded. He is not changing his mind to fit your mood. He is not molding truth to suit your dreams. He is calling you back to the word. And if you need confirmation, don't look for a donkey. Look to the cross. Look to the pages where the voice of the shepherd has already spoken. You don't need new permission. You need old obedience. So ask again, what if the voice you think is God is just echoing your desire? Will you obey? Even when the answer is hard, even when the money sounds good, even when the offer glitters, will you say, "Speak, Lord," even if he says no? Because that's when you know it's really his voice. When it doesn't tell you what you want, but it leads you where you need to go. Elijah had just called fire from heaven. He had faced down 450 prophets of Baal, soaked the altar in water, prayed and watched as flame fell from the sky. The people bowed. The false prophets fell. God had answered. Victory. But a day later, Elijah ran. Jezebel threatened his life, and the prophet who stood on Mount Carmel now collapsed under a broom tree asking to die. "I've had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life." Why? Because fear doesn't wait for logic. Because the soul gets tired, even after miracles. And so Elijah fled into the desert, into silence, into despair. He slept, he wept, he waited for death. But the voice hadn't left him. An angel touched him, gave him bread, gave him water. Twice. And Elijah walked 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There, in a cave, he waited again. God said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah poured it all out. His loneliness, his fear, his faithfulness, his failure. And God said, "Stand before me." Then came the wind. But God was not in the wind. Then the earthquake. But God was not in the earthquake. Then fire. But God was not in the fire. And then a whisper. And Elijah covered his face, because the voice came not in power, but in presence. Not in noise, but in nearness. When Elijah had nothing left, no hope, no fire, no strength, the whisper of God was enough. We want God to show up in fire. We want earthquakes that shake us, winds that bend trees, signs that make us sure. But more often, he comes as a whisper, because a whisper requires stillness. It requires nearness. Elijah didn't need power. He needed presence. And God knew that. So he whispered. And in that whisper was healing. In that whisper was purpose. Because after Elijah heard it, God gave him a new assignment. Not punishment, not shame, not rebuke. A mission. Go. Anoint Hazael. Anoint Jehu. Anoint Elisha. Because even when Elijah was done, God wasn't. Even when Elijah saw no future, God had one prepared. Even when Elijah thought he was alone, God said, "I have 7,000 who have not bowed." You see, silence is not absence. Stillness is not abandonment. When God seems quiet, he is closer than you think. He doesn't prove himself with thunder. He proves himself by staying. In the cave, in the weariness, in the question, "What are you doing here?" Not because he doesn't know, but because he wants you to say it, to name your ache, to reveal your wounds, and then to listen. You don't need more fire. You need the whisper. You don't need another miracle. You need to know he's near. Because when the soul breaks after battle, God doesn't send judgment. He sends bread. He sends water. He sends rest. And then he speaks again. And if you are in the cave today, if you're hiding worn numb, then maybe this is the moment. Maybe this is the whisper. He is still speaking, still calling, still present, and still asking, "What are you doing here?" So now pause. What wind are you waiting for? What earthquake do you think will finally make you believe? What fire are you demanding that God never promised? Because his greatest gift is not noise, it is nearness. And the whisper always comes after the silence. You who feel empty, listen. You who feel abandoned, lean in. You who think you've failed too much, fallen too far, lost too long. God is not done. He did not bring you this far to leave you in a cave. He is not looking for strong prophets. He is looking for listening hearts. Elijah thought the story was over, but the whisper said, "It's not. You still have a road to walk, a voice to carry, a name to bear. You are not forgotten. You are not finished. You are still his. So let the whisper do its work. Let the stillness speak louder than the storm. Let the bread and the water remind you. He sees. He knows. He's with you. And when the whisper comes, Cover your face, not in shame, but in wonder, because the God who commands fire chose to speak to you in a whisper. And that whisper is enough, even now, especially now. Peter had sworn it. If all fall away, I never will. He meant it. With sword in hand, he had tried to defend Jesus in the garden. He had followed at a distance. He had waited in the courtyard. But fear has a voice too. And that night, it whispered louder than love. You were with him, they said. No, I wasn't. You're one of his disciples. I don't know the man. The third time he swore. Cursed, denied. And then, the rooster crowed. And Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Not with anger, not with disappointment, but with knowing. And Peter remembered. He remembered the words, "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Failure echoes. It lingers in memory. It attaches to identity. Peter had heard the voice call him years before, "Follow me." Now all he could hear was the sound of his own denial. So he went back to fishing, back to the boat, back to the nets, back to the life before the voice. Because shame doesn't just accuse, it erases. It tells you you're disqualified, discarded, done. But Jesus wasn't finished. On the shore, a fire. On the fire, fish. Beside the fire, the risen Lord. "Children, do you have any fish?" he called. They didn't recognize him at first. But John said, "It is the Lord." And Peter, impulsive, wounded Peter, threw himself into the sea and swam. Because even when shame binds, love breaks through. Set. Breakfast was quiet. The same kind of fire, the same setting, but not the same Peter. Then came the voice. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Not Peter, the name Jesus had given him, but Simon, the name from before. 3 times he asked. 3 times Peter answered. 3 wounds, 3 healings. And after the last, Jesus said again, "Follow me." The voice that once called a fisherman now restored a failure. Not with condemnation, but with a question. Do you love me? Because that's what grace sounds like. Not accusation, but invitation. The voice didn't remind Peter of his failure. It called him back to his purpose. He had failed publicly, loudly, repeatedly. And yet, Jesus made breakfast. No sermon, no rebuke, just fire, just bread, just warmth. Because sometimes restoration doesn't begin with words. It begins with presence. And the question wasn't for information. Jesus knew Peter's heart. It was for restoration. Peter needed to say it. "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus answered not with, "I forgive you," but with, "Feed my sheep." Because love purpose. He didn't just clean Peter's past, he recommissioned his future. You may feel like Peter. You've wept bitterly. You've denied him not just with words, but with choices. And now shame sits with you by the fire. But listen again, because the voice that once called you from the boat is calling you back through the embers of failure. Do you love me? Not, did you fail me? Not, why did you do it? Just, do you love me? Because love is the beginning again. Love is the door back. And if you listen, you'll hear him not reminding you of the rooster, but of the call. Follow me. Not just when you're strong, not just when you're loyal, but even when you've fallen, especially then. So now ask yourself, whose voice is louder, shame or the shepherd? Are you letting failure define you, or letting the fire remind you? He still wants you, because the voice that calls also restores. And it's calling you again. The tomb was sealed. 4 days, long enough for hope to die, long enough for the body to smell, long enough for everyone to agree it was over. Mary stayed inside. Martha ran out to meet him. "If you had been here," she said, "my brother would not have died." It was not anger. It was grief wrapped in faith, because they believed in his power. They just didn't understand his timing. And Jesus did not defend himself. He did not explain the delay. He simply said, "Your brother will rise again." Martha gave the correct answer. "I know he will rise on the last day." But Jesus wasn't talking about someday. He was talking about now. "I am the resurrection and the life," he said. "Whoever believes in me will live even though he dies." Then he asked, "Do you believe this?" And Martha said yes. But still, the tomb was sealed. Still, death had won. Then Mary came. She fell at his feet, weeping. And Jesus wept. The one who knew he would raise Lazarus still shared the sorrow. Because love doesn't just fix, it feels. He didn't rush past the pain. He stood in it. He wept with them. Because the voice of God is not detached from your grief. It speaks, even through tears. He walked to the tomb, a cave, a stone, a crowd watching. "Take away the stone," he said. Martha hesitated. "Lord, he's been there 4 days. There will be a smell." But Jesus reminded her, "Did I not tell you, if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they moved the stone. And Jesus looked up, not at the tomb, but at heaven. "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Then the voice, loud, clear, commanding, "Lazarus, come out." And death listened. The man who had died walked out, grave clothes still wrapped around him, eyes blinking in the light, breath restored. Because when the voice speaks, even the tomb obeys. This wasn't just about Lazarus. This was about every place in you that feels sealed, every grief you buried, every hope you called it dead, every promise you wrapped in linen and left behind. Because Jesus didn't just raise a man, he revealed who he is. Resurrection isn't an event, it's a person. And when he speaks, what died lives again. So now pause. What tomb are you standing near? What dream have you buried? What ache have you learned to live with? The voice still speaks, and it's not afraid of your decay. It's not disturbed by the stench. It's not deterred by the years. He says, "Take away the stone." And then, "Come out," because death isn't the end. Not when the voice is life itself. The people watched in awe. But Jesus turned to them and said, "Unbind him and let him go." Because resurrection isn't just about breath. It's about freedom. It's not enough to live again. You must be unwrapped from what bound you. And Jesus invites the community to help. To unwrap shame. To untie fear. To release what grief has wrapped too tightly. Because when the voice speaks, it doesn't just raise you. It restores you. Lazarus wasn't the only one who came out that day. So did hope. So did faith. So did the belief that maybe, just maybe, God is still God, even when we wait, even when we weep, even when the stone seems too heavy. Because sometimes God waits until it smells, just to show you he's stronger than death itself. So, you might think it's too late, that the marriage is dead, the calling is gone, the joy has rotted. But what if the voice you need is already standing outside your tomb, calling your name, not to shame you, but to raise you, to bring you out, blinking in the light, to show you it's not over. It never was. So listen, he's still speaking, and death still obeys. The river was quiet, but inside Jacob, a storm. He had stolen the blessing. He had run from his brother. He had served 14 years, gained wives, children, wealth. But now, Esau was coming, and Jacob was afraid. So he divided his camp, sent gifts ahead, prayed a desperate prayer, and then sent his family across the stream. And Jacob was left alone. Night fell, and a man appeared. not with words, but with struggle. They wrestled till dawn. No name, no explanation, only tension, only pain. Because sometimes God doesn't speak through comfort. Sometimes he grapples. He touches the deepest parts of us, the ambitions, the guilt, the name we've carried too long. And in the fight, Jacob would not let go. "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And the voice finally asked, "What is your name?" Not because he didn't know, but because Jacob needed to say it. Jacob, the deceiver, the heel grabber, the one who took what wasn't his. And the voice said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, because you have wrestled with God and with man, and have prevailed." Jacob had spent a lifetime manipulating. He tricked his brother, deceived his father, outwitted his uncle. But now, alone by the river, none of that could save him. Because eventually God meets us in the dark, not to destroy us, but to name us. This was not just a fight. It was a breaking. And in the breaking, Jacob was changed. His hip was touched, he would walk with a limp. But he would walk with a new name, Israel. Not deceiver, but one who wrestles and holds on. The next morning, he limped toward Esau, not running, not hiding, but changed. And when Esau ran to meet him, not with a sword, but with a hug, Jacob knew. He had seen the face of God and lived, not because he was strong, but because he refused to let go. What name have you been carrying? Failure. Liar. Coward. What story have you believed? That you're too broken, too fake, too far gone. The voice is still asking, "What is your name?" Because before God can bless you, you must name your wound. You must name your fear. You must say it. And then he speaks back. You are not that anymore, because grace renames you, not based on your past, but on his purpose. So what name is he whispering now? Chosen, forgiven, wrestler, Israel. Not because you're perfect, but because you held on in the dark. And when morning comes, you will walk with a limp, but you will walk as someone new, someone named by God. Because the limp is not a curse, it's a sign that you've wrestled, that you've seen God, that you've been marked by mercy. And now, you walk different. You love different. You lead different. The blessing didn't come from manipulation. It came through surrender, through the dark, through the fight. There are moments in life when the only prayer you have is, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Not bless me with ease, not bless me with escape, but bless me with truth, with identity, with a name that heaven wrote. And when God gives you that name, no man can take it. No past can erase it. No fear can rename it. You are not what you were. You are not who you feared. You are named by the one who wrestled you into grace. So if you are in the night, if you're alone, aching, unsure, hold on, hold tight, say your name, let him say yours. And when morning breaks, you'll walk forward, not as Jacob, but as Israel, marked, named, blessed. Because sometimes the fight is how he speaks, and the limp is proof you are touched by God. So what name have you believed, and what name is he giving you? Now it was noon. The sun burned high, and she came alone. No one drew water at this hour, but she did. Because shame keeps you in the shadows, because whispers hurt worse than stones. So she came when others wouldn't. And there sat a man, tired, dusty, Jewish. And he said, "Give me a drink." She blinked. "You're a Jew. I'm a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for water?" Because the divide was deep. Gender, ethnicity, morality. But Jesus didn't back away. He leaned in. "If you knew who I am, you would have asked, and I would have given you living water." Living water. not just for her hands, for her soul. She deflected. "Are you greater than Jacob, who gave us this well?" And Jesus didn't argue. He offered, "Everyone who drinks this water will thirst again. But whoever drinks the water I give will never thirst. It will become a spring welling up to eternal life." And something in her cracked open. "Sir, give me this water." And then came the voice, "Go, call your husband." She paused. I have no husband." Jesus said, "You're right. You've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not your husband." But there was no scorn, no judgment, just truth, spoken gently, because the voice doesn't expose to shame. It reveals to heal. She tried to change the subject. "Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews say Jerusalem." But Jesus redirected her heart. "The hour is coming, and now is when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth." And she said, "I know that Messiah is coming." Jesus looked at her. "I who speak to you am he." And suddenly, the well was no longer about water. It was about identity, about healing, about being seen. She left her jar, the very thing she came for. She forgot. She ran back to town and said, "Come see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Christ?" And the town listened. To her, the woman they avoided, the one they whispered about, now became a voice. Because when Jesus meets you at the well, he doesn't just quench your thirst. He gives you a message. He gives you a voice. So what are you carrying to your own well? What shame keeps you hidden? What hour have you chosen so no one will see? Because he's already there, waiting, tired from the journey, but never too tired to speak to you, to see you, to say, "If you knew who I am." Maybe today that's what he's whispering. Not you've failed, but you're thirsty. Not. Why so many mistakes? But let me give you something better. Living water. That becomes a spring. That becomes a voice. That becomes a story worth telling. And maybe that's the real miracle. Not just that she believed, but that she spoke. That the silenced became a witness. That the ashamed became a messenger. And the town won because of her. Because of the woman who avoided the crowd, now gathering the crowd to Jesus. He stayed 2 days in that place, and many believed, not just because of her words, but because they heard him themselves. And they said, "Now we believe not just because of what you said, but because we have heard him. And we know this man truly is the Savior of the world." He met her when she wasn't looking for him. He spoke when she tried to avoid. He knew her fully and loved her anyway. That's the voice. Not thunder, not shame, but a man sitting by a well, asking for a drink. So what is he asking of you? Not to fix everything, just to listen, just to respond, just to leave the jar and run toward your calling. Because you weren't made to live thirsty, you were made to overflow. And the voice is waiting, still, by your well, right now. The sea was angry. Waves slammed the boat. Wind howled like judgment. And the disciples, seasoned fishermen, panicked. Because sometimes, even the strong are undone. Even the prepared feel overwhelmed. And Jesus, asleep, on a cushion, in the stern. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" They didn't ask for a sermon. They cried out, not with faith, but with fear. And Jesus woke, stood, faced the chaos, and spoke not to them, but to the wind, to the waves, "Peace, be still." And just like that, silence. The water stilled, the storm hushed, and the voice ruled even nature. Then Jesus turned to them. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They didn't answer. They couldn't, because fear had shifted. No longer fear of drowning, but fear of the one who calmed the deep. They asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." This wasn't just a story about a storm. It was a revelation. The sea was chaos. In Hebrew, thought the sea meant disorder, danger, death. And yet, with a word, he tamed it. Because the voice that spoke creation into being still speaks into your storm. Sometimes Jesus sleeps through what terrifies us. Not because he doesn't care, but because he's not threatened. Because he knows the end from the middle. Because peace doesn't mean the absence of storms. It means the presence of a greater voice. You may feel like those disciples, tossed, drenched, afraid, shouting, "Don't you care?" And maybe that's your prayer tonight. Not eloquent, just raw. Where are you? But the storm isn't stronger than his silence. And his delay is not his absence. He's in the boat, always. And when the time comes, he will speak. Not in panic, not in a rush, but with calm, with authority, with a whisper louder than thunder. Peace, be still. Because sometimes he speaks not to your storm, but to your soul. And maybe the sea outside you mirrors the one within. Maybe the fear isn't just of drowning, but of being forgotten. But he hasn't forgotten you. Not once, not ever. The disciples saw wind and waves, but Jesus saw an opportunity to show them that faith isn't proven in calm. It's formed in chaos. That trust isn't built on answers, but on presence. God. And when he calmed the storm, he didn't just quiet nature. He rewrote their fear. From "we're dying" to "who is this?" Because when the voice speaks, it doesn't just change the situation, it changes you. So now pause. Where are you in the boat? Are you sleeping in fear, panicking, shouting, or are you listening? Because maybe, just maybe, the voice is already rising. To speak into your storm, not to explain it, but to still it. Not to promise ease, but to remind you he is still in the boat. And that changes everything. So tonight, what would happen if instead of shouting at the storm, you listened for the voice? Because sometimes it's not about calming the storm outside, but awakening the faith inside. The kind that says, "I don't need to see the shore. I just need to know he's here." The kind that learns to sleep in storms because he does. The kind that sees fear, but follows anyway. Sad. They had seen him heal the sick, cast out demons, multiply bread. But this was different. This was command over chaos. This was authority over the elements. And they realized he wasn't just a teacher, not just a prophet. He was the one who hovered over the waters in the beginning, the one whose word holds back the flood, the one who, even asleep, is stronger than any storm. So what waves are crashing over you? What winds have screamed so long that you've forgotten silence? What fear has stolen your sleep? He's still in your boat, and he still speaks, sometimes with a shout, sometimes with a whisper, but always with power, always with peace. So tonight, will you trust the voice, even in the dark, even when it feels like he's sleeping, even when the boat is breaking? Because maybe the greater miracle isn't that he calms the storm. It's that he never left your side and still hasn't. So what if he's not asking you to row harder, but to listen closer? Because the voice that once said, "Peace, be still," is still speaking right now. To you, darkness fell. From noon until 3, the 6th hour to the 9th. And he hung there, silent, beaten, bleeding, bare. The one who had spoken stars into being now said nothing until, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The voice cried out, Not to men, to the Father, to heaven, and the heavens stayed shut. No dove descended, no answer thundered back. Just silence, holy, terrifying, complete. Because even the voice knew what it meant to feel abandoned, to ask and not hear, to cry and feel alone. And in that silence, he joined every unanswered prayer, every midnight weeping, every "God, where are you?" He didn't just die for you, he felt the silence for you. Because sometimes, the silence of God feels louder than thunder. It echoes through the soul, not with answers, but with ache. And yet, it was in that silence that salvation was sealed, not with a miracle, not with a voice from the clouds, but with absence, with stillness, with surrender. The crowd mocked, "If you are the Son of God, come down." But he didn't. Not because he couldn't, but because he wouldn't. Love held him there, not nails. And the silence wasn't a lack of power. It was the fullness of mercy. He could have called angels, split the sky, shattered the world. But instead, he stayed, hung, felt the silence, because he knew that to redeem our noise, he had to enter our quiet. To rescue us from abandonment, he had to feel it himself. So if heaven feels silent today, you're not alone. The voice has been there, felt that, endured it. And in the silence, he still saves. He whispered no reply. He gave no sign. But in the silence, the veil tore. The earth shook. The graves opened, because silence isn't always empty. Sometimes, it's sacred, a space for the divine to work unseen. You may not hear thunder, you may not feel answers, but the silence doesn't mean abandonment. It means you're standing on holy ground, the same ground where the Son once stood, where he felt what you feel, and still chose to stay, still chose to die. Because when the voice became silent, the world was changed. Love shouted loudest by saying nothing. So now in your silence, your prayers unanswered, your tears unnoticed, your pain unseen, know this: you're not forsaken, you're not forgotten, you're not alone. You're on Calvary ground. And that silence, it has already been filled by a voice who once cried out and then fell quiet, so that you would never have to. So in the stillness, what if you're not waiting for God to speak? What if He's waiting for you to rest in the silence and trust that love still holds? The morning was still, but her heart was not. Mary Magdalene wept outside the tomb. The stone was rolled away, his body gone, and with it her hope. She had seen too much, the lashes, the thorns, the final breath. She came to anoint the dead, but found emptiness. Two angels asked, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord," she said, "and I don't know where they've laid him." Then she turned and saw a man, the gardener, she thought. "Sir, if you have taken him away, tell me where." And then he said her name, Mary, and everything stopped. The storm in her stilled. Recognition flooded her soul. She turned and cried, "Rabboni." Teacher, not the dead, alive, not the end, a beginning. Because sometimes all it takes is a name, not shouted, not preached, just spoken, softly, personally, and the grave loses its grip. Well, she didn't recognize his face. Not at first, because pain blinds, tears blur. But when he said her name, the veil lifted. Because no one says your name like Jesus. No one calls you like the one who formed you, who saw you before shame, who loved you through the madness. And Mary, she became the first witness, Not Peter, not John, Mary, a woman once dismissed, now entrusted. Because resurrection always rewrites roles. The broken become bearers of glory. The grieving become heralds of joy. Jesus said, "Do not cling to me, but go and tell." And she did. Ran, breathless, tears on her cheeks, joy in her bones. "I have seen the Lord." Because the gospel begins with a name, and the voice still speaks it to you now. Not in thunder, not in clouds, but in the quiet whisper of your name, spoken from beyond the grave, from beyond fear. You may think he's the gardener, ordinary, absent, but he's standing right beside you, waiting, not to explain the tomb, but to speak into it, to say your name, and change everything. Because resurrection isn't just an event, it's an encounter. When the voice calls you, not by title, but by name, not sinner, but Mary, not failure, but beloved. So what name have you been listening to? What identity has the world stamped on your soul? What label has pain etched into your heart? He's speaking now, not to shame you, but to call you back to life. He is risen, and the first word from the other side was a name. Your name is next. Will you listen? The doors were locked. Fear thick in the air. Grief still fresh. And then Jesus came, not through the door, through their fear. He stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Not rebuke, not "Why did you run?" Just peace, because that's what the voice brings. Not condemnation, but comfort. Then he showed them his hands, his side. Proof not just of death, but of love, of wounds that spoke louder than words. And again he said, "Peace be with you, as the Father has sent me. So I send you." Then he breathed on them and said, "Receive the Holy Spirit." Because the voice doesn't just call you in, it sends you out, not alone, not empty, but filled with peace, with power, with purpose. He came to a room of fear and left behind a mission. He didn't ask them to be brave first. He gave them his breath, his spirit. Because courage doesn't come before calling. Calling brings the courage. Peace be with you. He said it twice, because some wounds need to hear it again and again, until fear softens, until guilt releases. And then the voice shifted, from comfort to commissioning. As the Father has sent me. Think of that. The same sending, the same authority, the same spirit, given to scared men in a locked room. Because the gospel doesn't wait for perfect people. It begins with the broken and breathes life into them, so they can breathe life into the world. And now, that same breath still moves, still fills, still sends, through rooms of fear, into streets of purpose. So what room are you hiding in? What fear has locked your doors? What shame has kept you silent? The voice is still entering locked places, still speaking peace, still breathing power. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to be willing. Willing to open the door, to step out, to be sent. He showed them his wounds, then gave them his spirit. Because your pain doesn't disqualify you. It becomes part of your message. So hear him again. Peace be with you, as the Father sent me. I am sending you. Not the you that pretends, not the you that hides. The real you, the scared, grieving, imperfect you. Sent, filled, loved. So tonight, will you let him send you from fear into freedom, from silence into testimony, from locked rooms into the world? Because the voice that breathes on you is the same that spoke stars into place. And he's still speaking, still sending, still calling. They went fishing, back to the nets, back to what they knew. Because sometimes after failure, we return to old routines, to safe places, even if they're empty. Peter had denied him. 3 times, the rooster crowed, and shame settled in like night. So he went fishing, and the others followed. But that night, they caught nothing. Emptiness echoed failure. And just as the sun rose, a man stood on the shore. "Friends, have you caught anything?" "No." "Throw your net on the right side of the boat." They did, and the net strained, overflowed, familiar, like déjà vu. And John whispered, "It is the Lord." Peter didn't wait, didn't think. He jumped in, swam ashore, soaked with longing. Jesus had a fire going, fish already cooking, bread ready. He didn't need their catch. He just wanted them. He said, "Come and have breakfast." Not a sermon, not a scolding, just breakfast. Because sometimes restoration begins with presence, with warmth, with a meal by the fire. No one dared ask, "Who are you?" They knew, but it felt too holy to name, too quiet to interrupt. And when they had eaten, Jesus turned to Peter. Not, "Why did you fail?" but "Do you love me?" 3 times, one for each denial. "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord. You know I do. Feed my sheep." Ma. Not punishment, but purpose. Not rebuke, but reinstatement. Because the voice doesn't cancel the fallen. He calls them again. Peter had returned to the nets, but Jesus returned him to the call. Because grace rewrites the story. He didn't ask Peter to prove himself. He didn't ask him to explain. He asked for love. Because love restores. Love recommissions. Feed my lambs. Not earn your place back, but walk in it again. Because in the kingdom, failure isn't final. Denial isn't the end. Peter had once stood by a charcoal fire and said, "I don't know him." Now he stands by another fire and says, "I love you." Because Jesus knows how to return us to the very place of our shame and rewrite it with grace. He used the same setting, the same senses, the smell of smoke, the feel of morning, the taste of bread, to remind Peter that nothing was lost, that everything could begin again. So what fire are you standing near? What denial echoes in your past? The voice is still asking, "Do you love me?" Not to condemn, but to call, to restore, to send. Because Peter didn't stay by the fire. He stood again, led again, loved again. And so can you. The voice is still on the shore, still preparing breakfast, still waiting for the moment to call you back. After breakfast, after the fire, after the forgiveness, Jesus looked at Peter and said something strange, something heavy. Said, "When you were young, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." He said this to show the kind of death Peter would die. And then he said, "Follow me." Not just to walk again, but to walk all the way. Not just to return, but to finish. Because the voice doesn't just restore the fallen. It leads them to glory, even through pain, even through sacrifice. So, Peter had once said, "I'll die with you," but he wasn't ready. Not then. Now, he was. Because love had done its work. Grace had steadied his feet. Jesus didn't hide the cost. He never does. He told Peter, "You will suffer. You will be stretched. But your ending will be glorious." No more denial. No more fear. Just faith. and footsteps. Ah, follow me. He had heard those words before, by the sea, in the beginning, but now they carried new weight. Not the call of a stranger, but the command of a savior, the echo of friendship, forgiveness, firelight. Because to follow Jesus isn't to escape suffering, it's to embrace meaning, even in suffering. Peter would walk a long road, through trials, through preaching, through prison, and one day he would stretch out his hands, just like his Lord, but not in shame, in glory. Because now he knew the voice that calls you also carries you through storms, through silence, through shame, to the very end. And the end isn't really the end. It's the fulfillment, the finish line, the crown. So when Jesus said, "Follow me," he meant through fire, through fear, through failure, and into forever. He knew Peter's beginning, and his betrayal, and his end, and he still said, "Follow me." So now the voice turns to you, not with shame, not with fear, but with love, with destiny, with the same words, "Follow me." He knows your path, your weakness, your future, and still he calls, "Will you follow?" He was breathing threats, burning with zeal, letters in hand, permission to imprison, to destroy, to cleanse the earth of this way. His name was Saul, a rising star among the Pharisees, smart, passionate, dangerous, and on the road to Damascus, he met the voice. A light flashed from heaven, brighter than the sun. He fell to the ground, dust in his mouth, glory in his eyes. And then he heard it, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Not why the violence, not why the hatred, but why me? Because when you wound the people of Jesus, you touch him. He takes it personally. Saul stammered, "Who are you, Lord?" And the voice replied, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." The world shifted. Everything collapsed. All he thought he knew burned away in a sentence. And the voice didn't condemn, didn't destroy, just blinded. Saul opened his eyes and saw nothing, because sometimes the only way to truly see is to lose your sight. For 3 days he sat in darkness. No food, no water, no words, just silence, just the memory of that voice. He came to destroy, but found himself undone. He set out to bind others, but now had to be led by the hand. Because when Jesus speaks, the proud bow, the violent fall, the blind awaken. And Saul, he was no longer the same. The persecutor was being prepared to become a preacher, the enemy, an apostle. Because the voice doesn't just call the good, it transforms the furious. And no one is beyond its reach. So what road are you walking? What anger burns in you? What justice are you chasing? Could it be the voice is waiting to interrupt, to confront, to call? Because if he can call Saul, he can call anyone, even you, even now, even here. And when he does, you won't just change direction, you'll change names, from enemy to beloved, from destroyer to disciple. Because when the voice speaks, even hatred must bow, even blindness gives way to light, even enemies become evangelists. So the question is, are you listening? His name was Ananias, a disciple, faithful, obedient, quiet. And one day, the voice spoke to him. "Ananias, here I am, O Lord. Go to the house of Judas on Straight Street, and ask for a man from Tarsus named Saul. Silence, then protest. Lord, I've heard about this man, how much harm he's done. To your saints, he has authority to imprison us. But the voice replied, he is my chosen instrument, to carry my name before nations and kings and the children of Israel. I will show him how much he must suffer for my sake. Ananias had a choice. Trust his fear or the voice. Hate the enemy or touch him. He went, afraid, unsure, obedient. He entered the house, laid his hands on the blind man, and said, Brother Saul, not enemy, not threat, brother, because love doesn't wait for perfection. It obeys the voice. Immediately, something like scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see again. He arose, was baptized, and began to preach. The same voice that blinded him now gave him sight. The same voice that stopped him now sent him. But none of it would have happened without Ananias. One man, one act of faith, one whisper obeyed. Because sometimes the voice doesn't shout. It asks. It invites. It says, go and touch the one you fear. And when you do, miracles unfold. Forgiveness is released. Vision is restored. Enemies become family. Whoa. And in that moment, the church changed, because one man listened and dared to call his enemy brother. So who is your Saul? Who have you written off? Who seems too far, too hardened, too dangerous? The voice might be asking you to go, to speak, to place a hand on what once terrified you. Vision. Because healing often begins when we dare to love. Not when it's safe, not when it makes sense, but when he says go. Ananias never became famous, but his obedience opened the door. For Paul, for the gospel to the nations. Son, one whisper, one word, one yes, Lord. So if the voice is calling you to forgive, to move toward, to say brother or sister, will you go? Will you trust that the voice knows, even your enemies, even your heart? Because the voice that transforms them is also transforming you. Every whisper in Scripture, every call in the dark, every Moses, Samuel, Mary, Peter was a shadow, a prelude, a rehearsal. Because one day, the voice will speak again, but louder, deeper, final. Jesus said, the hour is coming and is now here, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. Think of it. Graves splitting, bones rising, dust remembering who it was. Because of a voice. Not a trumpet, not thunder, but the Word himself, calling his own. From cemeteries, from oceans, from ashes, from forgotten places. And those who belong to him, they will rise, not to fear, but to life. Because the voice that called Lazarus from the tomb will call all creation. And for some, that voice will be joy. For others, terror. Because it will be unmistakable, irresistible, unavoidable. And all will rise, each to a destiny, some to eternal life, others to judgment. Because the voice brings life, but also reveals hearts. This is not metaphor, not myth, but promise, spoken by the one who cannot lie, the one who was dead and now lives forevermore, who holds the keys of death and Hades. He will call, and every soul will answer. The question is not if he will speak, but how we will respond. Because that voice, The one who spoke stars into place. The one who called to Adam in the garden. The one who wept at Lazarus's tomb will speak again. And no one will miss it. No grave will hold back. No darkness will resist. The final word will be a voice, not shouted, spoken, authoritative, tender, final. And for those who are his, it will sound like home. Not a stranger's shout, but a shepherd's call. The dead will hear it, because the dead still belong to him. Dust doesn't forget the voice. And in that moment, no resume matters, no title, no shame, no secret. Only one thing. Did you know that voice? Had you heard it in the quiet, in the word, in the whispers? Because the voice that speaks then is the same that speaks now. So today, before graves break open, before knees bow, before the skies split, he is still speaking. Not to frighten, but to invite. Do you hear him? Because one day, you will, and when you do, it will be the last voice you ever need to hear, and the first voice that truly knows your name. It began in a garden, with a whisper, "Where are you?" It echoed through fire, through thunder on Sinai, through the still small voice in a cave. It called to shepherds in fields, to fishermen on boats, to a girl in Nazareth, to a widow burying her son. It spoke from burning bushes and empty tombs. It thundered, it wept, it whispered, it healed. And through it all, it never stopped calling. What? The voice that shaped galaxies, that wept at tombs, that cried, "It is finished." That voice is still speaking. Not through storms now, but through pages, through wounds, through the Spirit. And one day, every knee will bow, every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Not because they were forced, but because the voice leaves no doubt. It is the sound of home, of truth, of mercy, of majesty. It echoes in your doubts. It calls in your silence. It speaks through your scars. Not to condemn, but to awaken. Not to shame, but to restore. The voice isn't done, because love doesn't stop speaking. It speaks when you rise, when you fall, when you wander. It says, "Come, return, follow me." Because you were made to hear it, to know it, to walk in it. And when all other voices fall silent, when the world fades to black, when even your heartbeat slows, the voice will remain. Strong, gentle, holy, familiar, sad. And it will call your name, just as it did Mary at the tomb, Miriam. And suddenly she knew. Because no one speaks your name like Jesus. So let it echo, now, today, inside your soul. The voice still speaks. Are you listening? Thank you for listening. Not just with your ears, but with your spirit. If this story stirred something in you, let it stay. Let it grow. Let it call you deeper. The voice that called Samuel, that wept with Mary, that restored Peter, that blinded Saul, is calling still. And perhaps it just called you. If it did, like, comment, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the voice doesn't stop, and neither will we. Subscribe for more sacred stories. Because next time, we'll walk another holy path. Until then, may you still your soul, tune your heart, and hear the voice that speaks your name. See you soon.